Hello colleagues, thanks for coming to our lunchtime presentation about the digital mapping project in MapKiberia. It's our last lunchtime presentation this year. We have done a range to really raise awareness about our work and the importance to push innovative ways in terms of our youth engagement work with UNICEF. We have had lunch presentations about World Cup in my village, where we brought, through new technologies, World Cup matches to the most remote villages and vulnerable children in Zambia and Rwanda. We've spoken with our partners at the Berkman Center at Harvard about digital citizenship and safety. And we also had recently a brown bag about MIT. The mapping project in MapKiberia is very close to our heart, and we have spending the last 10 months working on it. And we are glad about the partnership in this project. We closely worked with the HIV/AIDS section here in New York, as well as with the Kenya country office and our community partner in MapKiberia, Sodnet. As most of you know, MapKiberia is one of the largest slums in the world, and it's an area where young girls and women feel particularly unsafe. We have data that says that 60% of girls are living in fear of being raped, and hence there's a strong link between increased HIV infection and rape. And this is why we focus on risks, on mapping the risks and vulnerabilities in relation to HIV and AIDS. Also, the HIV prevalence in MapKiberia is 50% higher than the HIV prevalence in Kenya as a whole. With this first chapter, we have broadened the perception about the issue of risks and vulnerabilities. I think we have literally put this issue more strongly on the map. And from me spending there and spending time there and seeing the work that the girls have been doing and has been led by them, there was an incredible factor of empowerment and taking new ownership of a place. And it was amazing to see. We are currently working on a second phase with the HIV and AIDS section and the country office, where we're actually looking at implementing some more of these recommendations that came out of the mapping process in kind of some tangible change, whether it's like putting up more street lights in areas that are particularly dangerous or similar things. I would now like to hand over to Jimmy, who has kindly agreed to be here with us today. And he will talk about the programmatic component approach of this and why he chose to work with us. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks, Gary. I'm definitely overdressed for this crowd, but since that puts me in a position of authority, would everyone, the first and third rows, move 2 seats to your right. And then the people who are standing, please go ahead. 2 seats. Good. In there, keep moving. Fill in the empty seats there, so these people standing are not. Now, please sit down. Thanks. Someone has to sit in the first row. I'm Jimmy Kolker. I'm head of the HIV and AIDS section. And a year ago, February, we had a consultation here which included people from country regional offices, partners, and so on, working on youth empowerment and prevention. It's been a huge dilemma for the AIDS community, and the rates of HIV incidence, new infections among young people, have been going down in some countries, but nowhere have they gone down dramatically. And the number of young people, especially young women, who were being infected in Africa was alarmingly high, a couple of million per year. And this is a phenomenon that was not happening in the rest of the world. And it was important to us to try to figure out not only what are some of the drivers of the epidemic, which are age disparate sex, which are concurrent partnerships, lack of knowledge about HIV and prevention, lack of empowerment of girls to negotiate condom use or to resist transactional sex. On the other hand, these were all things over which many young people had succeeded. The number of young people who weren't infected, especially 15 to 17-year-olds, was quite encouraging compared to, for instance, women who were 18 and above, who were infected at 3 to 5 times the rate of girls who were just 2 or 3 years younger, even though the younger girls had experienced a sexual review. In particular, there was a story which may be apocryphal because we can't find it published anywhere. It was presented in Tanzania a couple of years ago. A young girl, age 16, dropped out of school, moves to Dar es Salaam, and she, somebody followed her, got stories from several people in that category, and a girl in that situation felt sexually threatened 20 times a day from the people who transport, men in the market, people around her residence, security guards. A number of times when she felt a bit at risk, a bit uncertain, a bit scared, just to maintain normal activities, were remarkable. And among that cohort, according to this study again, which is maybe apocryphal, the typical reaction of these young girls would be to find a male protector. And that male protector probably is the biggest HIV risk that she could imagine. This is an opportunistic young man who would say, okay, I'm going to take care of you, and of course, to her it's an enormous asset in the community, but in fact, that kind of relationship, even though it's a trusting, stable relationship, means that she's unlikely to use a condom, and he's probably having other partners, and that her situation may be even worse off than if she had tried to manage her environment. And so when Garrett and Josh came to me with the idea that people using an open street maps approach had MapKiberia using young volunteers, GPS and open source data, that there might be a way to fulfill what our prevention working group had tried to find, a sense of risk and responsibility. How do we get young people to recognize and own their own risk? And then how do we get duty bearers and others in authority to recognize that risk, use the documentation which the young people themselves are part of, and actually make some changes? It could be as simple as putting a street light, or it could be actually trying to close down or to release different areas of town in which young people feel especially vulnerable. Mapping certainly is a well-known technique. We've seen great examples of mapping for safe schools, mapping to look at vulnerability in other respects. But so far as I know, the idea of HIV vulnerability mapping, especially that done by young people themselves, with them owning the data and them being able to then be the advocates for their own better lives, is something that we thought was worth a try. This would be neat. It would be an opportunity to not only work on adolescent development, on youth empowerment, but also the sense of how do we get the community to own its HIV problem and to address it in a way which includes the active voice of young people and building on their experience, rather than having adults or authorities assume that they know what's in young people's best interest. So it was a fascinating model. We didn't have any trouble convincing Josh and Garrett to make trips to Kiberia to carry it out, and I'm eager to see their results as you are. Very proud of this opportunity. Thanks very much.
So, after the planning phase, Josh was parachuted into Kiberia, working with our local office there, and we're going to hear from him how it all unfolded on the ground. Josh.
My name is Josh Goldstein, and I've had the pleasure of working with Jimmy and Garrett in the youth section here, particularly on this project, MapKiberia. It was a fantastic opportunity. As we pointed out, there were two interesting elements here, I think, broadly speaking. The first is the understanding vulnerability and its risk with HIV. And the second is that the cost and barriers to access to information are falling precipitously. And the question was, could we use that latter point as an advocacy tool for both empowering groups who had good ideas to solve their own problems in the community, and also get some information into the hands of planners, people who work with governments, with UNICEF and other organizations, to have a better understanding. And I first should say the idea for MapKiberia came from two fantastic young visionaries from the US who had worked with the OpenStreetMap community. And for those of you who don't know, OpenStreetMap, you can sort of think of it as the Wikipedia of maps. It's a free, open source map that anyone in the world can edit. And what they noticed was that there was very little data on places that were sort of off the grid, so to speak. And so they went to places like Kiberia to work with young people to create these maps. And it was a fantastic partnership with UNICEF, I think, because they were hungry to answer this question as well. How can we use this technology to empower people to tangibly improve their own lives? And so I'll just tell the story of how this developed. Before February, I guess late 2009, the group with their partners in Kenya, Social Development Network, gathered in Kiberia and brought on a group of young mappers, young men and young women from around the community, not who had technical skill of any sort, but who were already leaders in their community. And so they were trained on basic consumer-grade Garmin GPS devices, the same that you would use here, and an open-source software stack called Java OSM to load data and information about their community. And so initially the question was, what do you find interesting about this community? And so they would go around, there's 13 villages in Kiberia, and they went around the community and placed data points, streets, churches, health clinics, these sorts of things. And that's what gave you the base map of Kiberia. And so what you see here is one iteration of many. And so you see that there's the railroad track going right through the middle. There's paths. There's different data points on there. And one thing I think is compelling about this base map is that there had literally not been a available map of Kiberia. All the tourist maps, it was labeled a game park in Nairobi. You had, when I went to the government of Kenya, they were using satellite data, which, if you can imagine looking at a slum from an aerial imagery, you're not going to get a lot of information about what's under there. So for the first time, not only for planners, but also for the community organizations themselves, having a sense of what's in the community. And I think this is important, not because they needed a map to get around, but because it was some representation of themselves to the world and a common place for understanding. So when I had the pleasure to come on, when UNICEF began to partner with MapKiberia, we went one level deeper and said, what can we collect? What can these young men and young women collect about safety, about vulnerability, about their risks, and how can they represent that? So they took the base map and dove a little bit deeper, collecting things that they called Hatari spots, danger spots, places where there were bars, places where young girls felt safe. There were actually a number of organizations that actually had safe spaces. So what you had was a large number of points on this map that you could access, interlay on top of each other to have a better sense of what's happening in the community.